Alright, welcome back to JavaScript the Basics. In this section, we're going to look at loops in JavaScript. What is a loop in JavaScript? Loops evaluate a condition. If true, we enter a code block and run the statements within the code block. After running the code block, we check the condition again, and if it is still true, the code block will run again. We repeat this until the condition returns false. But before we can look at loops, we have to examine what it means to check a condition in JavaScript. What does it mean to check a condition? Conditional statements execute or skip other statements depending on the value of a specified expression. These statements are the decision points of your code, and they are also sometimes known as branches or paths. It is like saying, if it is true, go this path. If it is false, take this path. If you imagine a JavaScript interpreter following a path through your code, the conditional statements are the places where the code branches into two or more paths as the interpreter chooses which path to follow. Let's look at true and false conditions. We saw this in earlier lessons when we looked at equality and inequality operators and evaluating an expression as true or false. The string with the character 8 is equal in value to the number 8 because of coercion in JavaScript. However, when we use the strict equality operator of triple equals, we find that the type of string and number are not the same, so we evaluate the expression as false. In our first case, we would take the true path and enter into the code block. In our second case, we would take the false path and step over the code block. We can use greater and less than symbols as well to evaluate expressions. The number 5 is greater than 4, so the expression evaluates to true, and we step into the code block. In our second example, the number 4 is not greater than 6, so it evaluates to false and we step over the code block. There are also truthy and falsy expressions in JavaScript. If you're new to programming, these terms truthy and falsy might be an odd concept. To understand the context of truthy and falsy expressions, we have to look at booleans. Booleans are named after George Boole, an English mathematician, educator, philosopher, and logician. So what are truthy and falsy values? A falsy value is a value that translates to false when evaluated in a Boolean context. A truthy value is a value that translates to true when evaluated in a Boolean context. Let's start off with falsy values. False, by itself, is a falsy value. 0, an empty string. Null, undefined, and not a number are all falsy values. What these falsy values mean are that we choose the path that steps over the code block. We don't look inside of it. So what is a truthy value? It's everything that's not a falsy value. No list to remember. If it isn't a falsy statement that we looked at above, then it is a truthy statement. So we've looked at equality and inequality operators, greater than and less than operators, along with truthy and falsy values. Let's look at one more way to evaluate an expression. Let's look at logical operators. Logical operators allow you to compare the results of more than one comparison operator. We're going to look at the logical AND, as well as the logical OR operators. Let's begin with the logical AND. This operator is going to test for more than one condition. We will use the double ampersand sign. We find this on our keyboard with Shift 7. Let's look at some code. We have 5 is greater than 4, double ampersand, 8 is greater than 3. The double ampersand tells us that within the opening and closing parentheses that both of our expressions must evaluate to true for the whole expression to evaluate to true. So 5 is greater than 4 and 8 is greater than 3 are both true, so we evaluate this to true. Our next examples all translate to false because both of the expressions are not true. Only in our first case will a true value lead us into the code block while all other expressions evaluate to false, taking us on a path to step over the code. Now let's turn to the logical operator OR. This operator is looking for at least one condition to be true. Let's look at our previous code example. Let's remove the double ampersands and we'll replace it for the two pipes for the OR operator. 5 is greater than 4, so our expression will evaluate to true, no matter what the second condition is. We see this for our second and third examples as well. We don't need both conditions to be true, only one. In our last example, both conditions are false, so our OR operator returns this expression as false. So we've talked a lot about evaluating expressions and paths. Let's talk about our path signs informing our JavaScript interpreter where we want to go. Let's look at if statements, else statements, and else if statements. Let's begin with if statements. The if statement is the fundamental control statement. The if statement is the fundamental control statement that allows JavaScript to make decisions, or more precisely, to execute statements conditionally and know which path to take. The syntax of the if statement will involve the keyword if, followed by parentheses filled with an expression, then followed by a block of code. If the expression evaluates to true, we will enter into the code block. If the expression evaluates to false, then we will step over that code. That should sound like review to what we just covered. If the number 5 is greater than the number 4, then we're going to enter into the code block. This will allow us to log the string true condition. Now if we switch it up and put a condition that is false, like 5 is greater than 6, when we run our code, we will not enter that code block and do not have access to the string true condition. The second form of the if statement introduces the else clause, which will be executed when the expression is false. What if you want several options to evaluate to true? Let's declare a variable called test score. We'll give it a value of 88. We'll then create an if-else statement. And we have test score as an expression is greater than 90. We have a code block that says congratulations, you got an A. After that, we have an else statement, and we have a console log that says you failed, better study more next time. In our if-else statement, if we evaluate to true, we get a response of congratulations, you got an A. If we evaluate to false, we take the path to the else statement and you receive a response of you failed, better study next time. You can imagine that this isn't super helpful with a score of 88, which is well above failing. So let's add some else if options. If the score is above an 80, we'll go into the code block that returns the string great job, you got a B, and then repeat that pattern of else if for more specific feedback. This section of code does a much better response to an 88, a 78, or a 68, rather than a pass-fail only version of the code. Alright, that's all we have for now. Thanks for taking a first look at evaluating conditions. We are all set for our next lesson on JavaScript loops. But first, let's head to the lab and put what we have learned into practice.